Okay. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our very first webinar about Global G.A.P Integrated Farm Assurance, where I will be looking at the overview of pre-audit tips. So basically, these are essential tips that you would like to consider before the commencement of your initial external audit. As we know by now, there is two audits for Global G.A.P. There's an announced audit and there's a follow-up audit, which is called an unannounced audit. So basically, in your announced audit, a grower or producer the date of the inspection is communicated way in advance to the grower or producer. Then with regards to the follow-up, which is unannounced audit, the date of the inspection is only communicated within a period of 24 hours before the inspection. So basically, that's why it's called an unannounced audit. So with that being said, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mandla. I'm a food safety consultant as well as a junior extension officer. Part of my responsibilities at ASC Consultants, I do facilitation for food safety training courses, such as your food safety, basic food safety for persons in charge, basic food safety for food handlers. I do good manufacturing practices courses, basic HACCP courses. I do advanced courses of HACCP as well. And yeah, the list goes on. In addition, also do internal auditing, particularly for Global G.A.P. So I do preparatory audit for over 14 farmers around Eastern Cape, so of which I enjoy. And it is my great pleasure to share my knowledge or my findings on some of the things that I've learned from these audits, so I can contribute to make or to the betterment or to enhance the audits for other farmers in such a way that they are passing them in flying colors. So yeah, let's get straight to it. Allow me to share my presentation for the day with you so we can begin the business for the day. Okay, there we go. I just want to make it big so it's visible. Okay, brilliant. Okay, like I said, this would be pre-audit tips part 1. So you can be rest assured there will be part 2 and part 3 because I have broken them down into segments. So some of the things may not be covered in this, such as particularly your documentations that is normally requested inside your Global G.A.P file. So there would be a separate presentation or webinar for that particular part. Hence, I call this part 1. So with that being said, let's get straight to it. Okay, so these are basically the contents we'll look at. Firstly, we'll have a look what Global G.A.P is, the definition, its purpose. Secondly, we'll have a look at the chemical and fertilizer storeroom inspection. According to my opinion, I have found it to be one of the most challenging aspects of the whole Global G.A.P inspection, because most growers or producers, they tend to find major mass finding under this particular segment of chemical and fertilizer storeroom. Then thirdly, we'll look at the PPP records and documentation. And don't be confused by the acronym PPP. It stands for your plant protection product, which basically are essentially your chemicals, your pesticides, insecticides, your fungicide, etc. Then fourth, we'll look at the equipment inspection. Then fifth, we'll look at orchard inspection requirement. Then lastly, we'll have a look at what is it that the auditors are more likely to check when it comes to workers' health and safety and welfare. All right, let's move on. So let's first ask ourselves, what is a Global G.A.P audit? So because I'm a facilitator, so I like to simplify concepts. So I simplify concepts in order to reach a wider audience. So what I've done here, I've defined a Global G.A.P audit as an assessment of production processes implemented by producers or growers, basically throughout their value chain. So these are assessment of production practices, okay, or processes. So they are really assessing your processes or the practices under which your product was produced. Okay, so now a global G.A.P audit is mainly conducted or carried out by what we call a certification body or CB. So now a certification body is an external organization or external third-party organization which is trained and approved by global G.A.P in order to carry out these global G.A.P audits and subsequently issue out certifications or certificates. Then the purpose of the global G.A.P audits mainly is to promote safe production of food, environment conservation, and sustainable agriculture. So safe production of food, it mainly implies what we call IPM, like your integrated pest management system, which is a more like a system that looks at the holistic nature of controlling pests. So they employ your chemical technique in order to control pests. They also employ your physical aspects, such as your traps, in order to trap these insects, then or using of pheromones in order to to get rid of pests, as well as biological, which means they use biologically derived chemical or chemicals that are not severe, that are not too dangerous in order to get rid of these pests. All right, then as we move on, it also protects the workers' health and safety and welfare, and also prevent animal and environmental harm as well. So by so doing, Global G.A.P makes sure the workers, they are being furnished or provided with appropriate personal protective equipment, such as your respirators. Are the respirators suitable for the use? Are the filters inside the respirators up to date? They check also the face shield, for example, is the spraying operator provided with the face shield in an event where an MSDS requires them to wear one? Are they also provided with gloves, your rubber boots, etc.? Then with regards to prevention of animal and environmental harm, it seeks to reduce the use of chemical to limit the use of chemical as little as possible. So as we know, chemicals are not just dangerous to people, but they also pose a negative effect to the environment. They also constitute this environmental pollution, and they also degrade the soil structure, etc. All right. Then it also prioritizes consumers' health. So what do we mean by that? By production of safe food, it means that consumers will be free from foodborne illnesses, and they will also be free from an event where they ingest or consume food that consists of glass residue or any other hazardous materials that will likely cause injury to them. Okay, so let's move on. So now let's have a look, like I said, in my opinion, which constitute one of the most challenging aspects of the whole global G.A.P inspection, which is a chemical storeroom inspection. So the chemical storeroom inspection, auditors are more likely to ask for, to have a look if the chemicals inside the chemical storeroom, if they are stored according to the local regulations. So the local regulation basically should specify that the chemicals should never be stored directly on the floor. Your red labels must be stored inside the cage, and they must be locked at all times. The chemicals must be stored preferably according to their label groupings. Like your blue label, they must be grouped together. Yellow labels, they must be grouped together, and so on. And furthermore, as we move along, there should be adequate ventilation. As you can see, this particular clause, its reference it's bolded. So wherever you see a bolded a bolded clause, it means that this particular requirement, it is a major must requirement. So everything that is not bolded, it's a minor, but those that are bolded, it's a major must. So a producer knows very well that they need to have little to no major must requirements or major must finding, because that would constitute violations, or that would prejudice your chances of getting your certification. Then as we move on, let's have a look. There should be sufficient light inside the chemical storeroom. So the light, if it's not sufficient, it could be supplemented by artificial light, or otherwise that natural light could be used if it's sufficient. Then there should be an up-to-date stock inventories of the PPPs or chemicals. This is a list of all the chemicals that are in store, their commercial names, their quantity, their batch codes, if there's any. Yes, and there should be material dedicated for chemical spillage. So example of this material consists of your dustpan, your sand, your brush, as well as a plastic, your black refuse plastic bag. So basically what happens in an event where you've got a chemical spillage, you would use that sand to pour it over the chemical that is spilled on the floor, right? Allow the sand to absorb the chemical. Then later on, you use the dustpan and your brush to get rid of the sand that is absorbed, that has absorbed the chemical. Then you dispose that particular sand inside the black refuse bag and tie it and store it together with your empty chemical containers, in which they should be locked, preferably. Yeah, and you are only to give that particular chemical spillage to a person or to an organization that collects, or that is authorized to collect, empty chemical containers, which is approved and authorized to do so, of course. Okay, so let's move along. There should be also, we can also look at the storage of your chemical should be located away from other material. This means that your chemicals must be stored away from your fertilizers, for example. Let's make an example. Let's say you've got one chemical storeroom, then you store both your fertilizers and chemical in there. So it is essential that you make a physical barrier that separates the chemicals and the fertilizer. Then you have signages that all clearly indicate which ones are fertilizers and which ones are chemical. So this is done mainly to avoid or to prevent any cross-contamination between the two. Okay, so let's move on now to look at the last point here, which speaks about the shelf must be made of non-absorbent material. So the material that is used to construct the shelving, it must be preferably stainless steel, because it's non-absorbent, it's rust-proof, it's corrosion-free, and it's easy to clean. Alternatively, you could use plastic pallets. Plastic pallets, they also non-absorbent and easy to clean. They are allowed to be used. Let's move on. So now, it's important also to note that auditors are likely to have a look if your liquid-based chemicals are not stored above the powdery and granular chemicals. So we avoid a situation where there is a chemical leakage and the liquid-based chemical is above, or it's stored above a powdery or granular chemicals. In that event, there is a likelihood that there could be a chemical combustion or a chemical reaction that will result in a combustion. So that's why it's important. As you can see, this is also bolded, which means it's a major must requirement. So by no means should the liquid-based chemical stored above powdery or granular-based chemical. Then there should be an accident procedure contact list that is conspicuously displayed, preferably outside the chemical storeroom. So this Accident procedure contact list is the signage that consists of your ambulance number, your hospital, your doctor number, consists of your police number, your fire emergency number, as well as your manager and supervisor number as well. Then the next point to look at could be your amenities for eye washing purposes for spraying operators. So these could either be your basin, which should not be anything 10 meters away from the chemical storeroom, or perhaps a shower, okay? Basin or a shower. You can also have an eye bottle, which is found inside your first aid kit. It needs to contain potable water. So this will be used in an event where an operator has got chemical that has sprayed him in the eye as a result. Then empty chemical containers must be rinsed 3 times, or they must be triple rinsed, then punctured immediately, after which they must be stored in a secure place. So this is a major requirement, or major must requirement. As you can see, it's bolded. Then the reusing of empty PPP container for other purposes is strictly prohibited. So it's very important for workers to know that under no circumstances the empty chemical container should be reused for other purposes, such as storage of oil, mixing of other chemicals, or basically being used for other purposes that serve their own personal purposes, because they still contain residues of those chemicals, and they are very harmful. And that's why it is against the law to make use of them. So should there be a finding that they are being used, so yeah, there will be a finding as a result by the auditor. Then I must emphasize that empty chemical containers must be stored securely. As I said, the facility which you use to store these containers, it must be locked, and it shouldn't be accessible to the public, or it must be well away or locked, and be locked, kept safe, in order to avoid, little children from accessing those empty chemical containers. Then the first aid kit must be available, or it must be close by, or it must be available or on site. So the first aid kit, what I'd like to emphasize about its contents, most particularly with regards to chemical, there should be alkaline water inside. So your bottle of alkaline water inside is very important in this regard, because it would be used in an instant where someone has ingested a particular chemical. Then, excuse me, they would then take the alkaline water, drink it in order to neutralize that acid inside the stomach while they're seeking medical advice or medical attention. All right, so let's move on and look at the requirements for plant protection product records and documentation. So these are the records and documentation that are required for chemicals. So it's very important that records indicating the disposal of empty chemicals must be readily available. So each time an approved, qualified organization that comes and collects your empty chemicals, they must furnish you with proof or a record, or some sort of like an evidence that they have collected this particular empty chemical. So with regards to us at ASC, we have what we call a global G.A.P document toolkit that we are selling, which also consists nice templates that you can use in order to record your empty chemical disposal, which mainly addresses, or it consists of the name of the company that's collecting those empty chemicals, the date under which they were collected, the quantity, batch number, the name of the personnel who's collecting the empty chemical, as well as the date, time, and signature. Then secondly, let's have a look at the requirement for safety advice or material safety data sheet, which is your MSDS. So it's important that your operators must have access, or they must have, they must have access to your material safety data sheet that mainly informs them what particular personal protective equipment they need to wear when they are spraying chemical. For example, MSDS might tell you you need to wear a face shield, you need to wear gloves, you need to wear your protective your protective eye shades maybe, um, or you perhaps need to wear a certain personal protective equipment like that is acid resistant. So it mainly informs you what type of PPE is required for each particular chemical when you are spraying. Then your PPP application records. So your chemical application records consist mainly of the name of the sprayer operator, the date, the orchard name that is sprayed, and the method of spraying that is used. Is it foliar? What kind, is it aerial? Then the weather condition for that particular day, the time, the application rates, all of those things will be found on the chemical application records. Then your pre-harvest interval dates, your spray records and your harvest date must correlate. So this means that after you have sprayed, let's say you are harvesting, for example, you are about to harvest, then you have just sprayed a particular chemical to control, say, for argument's sake, your citrus black spot, okay? So now you have to give it a predetermined time period, which means there is a period after you have sprayed that particular produce, let's say citrus, after you have sprayed your citrus and the date of harvest, that particular time period between after you have sprayed and the date of harvest is called your pre-harvest interval. So you allow the chemical to lessen, or the chemical residue on the fruit not to be as intensive. Then let's move on. Let's look at the MRL, which must comply with the destination countries. So the MRL for the country of the production, they are most likely different from the country of export. Say you are producing your citrus in South Africa, then you are selling your citrus in the UK. So you need to familiar with what are the MRL requirements in UK as well as in South Africa. So you must be informed of those two different countries' MRL requirements. Then there should be documented MRL risk assessment. By the way, MRL stands for maximum residue limit, which means before the fruit is being released for sale or to the consumers, it has to go to test. It must be tested for maximum residue limit to check that the chemical that was sprayed, the residue, the remains inside the chemical, are they not in such large quantity that they might cause any type of illnesses to a to a consumer. So they are tested, and there is particular threshold that they should not exceed in order for them to be rendered compliant. Then MRL analysis. This is a test for MRL that must be conducted by preferably a laboratory that is ISO accredited or SANAS approved. Okay, then MRL analysis laboratory accredited. Like as I said, the laboratory must either be ISO or SANAS approved in the case of South African laboratories. Then auditors are also likely to ask for your mixing apparatus as well as your measuring equipment like your scales. And your scales must be calibrated, and there must be a record to prove that it has been calibrated for that particular season, which means you have to produce something if it's not on the scale itself to show that when was the last date it was calibrated. Okay, let's move along. So now there should be documented MRL action plan. So inside your MRL action plan, you are actually stating what would you do? What precautionary measurement would you take in order to deal with your fruit in an event where your MRL has exceeded the requirements or it does not comply to the regulation? Okay, so would you dispose it? How would you dispose it? Are you going to withdraw, or are you going to recall that particular product? So your MRL action plan must address those particular topics. Then your spraying operator must be subjected to an annual medical screening. So this is done on a yearly basis in order to check the chemical residue in the bloodstream of the operators. So it should indicate they also have a particular threshold that is required by law. Then there should be documented re-entry procedures. So your operators must be well informed of the time period for re-entry, and it is advisable that if a particular block, orchard, or plot has been sprayed, there should be a signage that communicates to other people, workers or visitors or subcontractors that they shouldn't enter that particular block, plot or orchard until a certain time period, preferably after the chemical has dried, they can access that particular orchard. Okay, so let's move on now and let's have a look at the requirements for equipment inspection. So auditors are likely, actually, this is not a like, it's a must. So auditors will definitely ask for calibration for your spraying equipment. So these are calibration records to prove that your spraying equipment has been calibrated by a competent, approved, and qualified technician on a yearly basis or at the beginning of each season to make sure that it delivered the accurate rate of the chemicals that you are spraying. Then the spraying tanks and the knapsack, they must be stored away from other materials. So this is a major must. As you can see, it's bolded. So it must be stored away from preferably chemicals. So you should never mix your spraying tanks and your knapsack with your produce, or you store them in the same storage where you are keeping your citrus, for example. So that should be avoided. So as we move on, let's have a look now at the requirements or the tips with regards to orchard inspection. First and foremost, there should be a signage which speaks to site references. So your site reference signage must consist of your tree consensus, the number of trees planted, the intra-row spacing, the name, the cultivar, or the cultivar name, or the variety name of the particular produce that you are producing. If there is a rootstock that is being used, it can also be put on the signage. Then production site records. These site records, they come handy when you are doing your mass balance verification. So basically, site production record, it informs you how many tons or kilos has your production produced for export, how many tons or kilos has it produced for your local market, and how many kilos has it produced or has gone for waste. For example, upon harvesting, it's inevitable that some of the fruit will make or will find their way onto the ground. So such fruit will constitute as waste, and they must be calculated, or they must be calculated so we can know exactly which portion of this production went to waste. So all of those must be recorded on production site record. So as you can see, these are bolded, which means they are major must requirements. Then your hygiene instruction, they must be conspicuously displayed. This hygiene instruction must address not only your workers, but as well as your subcontractors and your visitors. So in example, this instruction is likely to consist of your hand washing procedure. Under which condition does a food handler have to wash their hands, or a picker or a harvester? Maybe, for example, after they've smoked, after they've taken a break, after they went to a bathroom, they must wash their hands. Maybe after they've eaten, for example, they must wash their hand, or after they've handled any product that has contaminants, such as a chemical, for example, they need to wash their hands. All right, so let's now move on. Let's have now look at the next point, which deals with the workers' health and safety training, as well as workers and hygiene training. As you can see, both of these are bolded, which means they are major must requirement. So it's very important that at the beginning of each season, workers need to be provided with hygiene and workers' health and safety training. So these to prove that these training have been conducted, evidence in a form of attendance register with the names and signatures of the attendees or the workers must be present, and it must be kept on file. Then the training certificate for those workers who are handling hazardous substances, such as your chemical sprayer or your chemical operators, they need to be kept on file. So people that are spraying chemical, it's recommended that they must receive a mandatory training with regards to handling and application of chemicals. Then there should be warning signs for potential hazardous areas. So potential hazardous areas does not only include your chemical in your fertilizer storeroom, but it also extends to, for example, your pump house, which has got your power boxes. So those power boxes need to be labeled, or they need to have a signage, your skull and bone signage. The same can be said to your filling point. They need to have a signage for skull and bone as well as to indicate that is a particular filling point. Okay, so now the production side must be kept tidy and orderly. So the production side, it's very important that particularly the seasonal workers, they must know that they should not throw any litters around, particularly your non-degradable litters such as your plastics, your bottles, your glasses, and your metals. So special attention must be given to non-degradable waste in this regard. As we can see, this is also bolded, which means it's a major must requirement. So it's very important. So, and we also would have to consider monitoring of on-farm energy use. So this can be produced in the form of a municipal receipt of energy consumption. So your water and lights, or your lights from your municipality, your light receipt, it can be used as proof, because the main aim here is to keep an inventory of our energy consumption, and also try to use implements as well as equipment that consumes less energy. So as we move to sustainable agriculture and renewable energy, so we are trying to make use of those production practices and equipment that consume lesser and lesser energy in order to conserve energy, of course. Okay, as we move along under still orchard inspection, then hand washing facilities, particularly for harvesting workers, they must be of sanitary condition, or they must be in hygienic state. And it's important that these hand washing facilities, they must be washed. So they must be on the cleaning. I mean, they must be on the cleaning schedule, and each time they are being cleaned, there must be a record that are being recorded. Then those records must be filed inside the global G.A.P file under record for record cleaning and hygiene cleaning records. Then your ablution for workers in the orchard, they must be of sanitary condition, or they must be kept on hygienic state at all times. Ablution or toilets, they must be cleaned regularly. There must be cleaning itinerary or cleaning programs, and each time the toilet is clean, it must be recorded, and those records must be kept on file. They would be required by the audit when they're going through your global G.A.P file, as they would require hygiene records, then you would be able to produce it. Then lastly, the orchard must be free from waste and litter. As indicated, special attention must be paid particularly to non-degradable waste. Even if it's degradable waste like your citrus fruit waste, for example, it should not be disposed of anything other than 100 meters away from the orchard. So that's also a very important thing to consider. So wherever you are digging a hole for your citrus waste, it must be at least 100 meters away from the orchard. So like I said, special attention must be paid to non-degradable waste such as your glasses, your metals, as well as your plastic. So your orchard must be free from those types of waste. All right, now let's have a look at our last topic, which deals with workers' health and safety and welfare. Okay, so first thing first, the first aider certificate, it's important that it must be available. It is a global G.A.P requirement that at least for each group of 50 workers, one person must be trained with regards to first aid, and that person must have this particular first aid certificate. Then the first aid kit must be complete and maintained, and it must be accessible on site. So with regards to where it must be stored, it's not quite clear according to the global G.A.P standard, but what they are saying is that it must be easily accessible. And yeah, in case it's staying at the office, there must be a transport which can fetch it if there is a need, if there is an emergency. Then our third point deals with workers must be equipped with the appropriate or required PPE. So this is a major must requirement, as you can see. So special attention is being paid to those workers that are working with chemical. They must be provided with appropriate face shield where required. Your MSDS will tell you if it is a need for an operator to use a respirator, and those respirators, the filters inside, they must be it must be inorganic, for inorganic chemicals, and they must also be up to date because the filters expired. So they must be checked for expiry date before the operator might be able to use them. Then furthermore, gloves, if there is a need, they must be provided. And your work suit, there's different types of spraying work suit that must be provided for different purposes as well. Right, then the fourth point is your personal protective clothing or personal protective equipment must be cleaned and stored to prevent contamination. So it's important that your PPEs must be cleaned separate from personal clothing, all right? And in an instant where there is an employee that is responsible on cleaning this personal protective equipment, it is very important that they too must be subjected to an annual medical screening for MRR residue onto their bloodstream. So that particular person, similar to the chemical sprayers, they must be subjected to a medical screening on an annual basis. Okay, so now another point to look at is that there must be a management member who is responsible for workers' health and safety, which means there must be a certain member from the management who is appointed particularly to deal with the health and safety issues that are affecting workers at the orchard. Excuse me. All right, then our next point, which brings us to our next point, that there needs to be a two-way communication between the management and workers. So whatever is affecting the workers and at the field with regards to personal protective equipment must be addressed by a way of a grievance box. So you should have a grievance box that is conspicuously displayed, particularly where there is a meeting on a daily basis between the workers and management. So if workers have got a grievance, they must be, without a fear or favor, be able to communicate their grievances through this grievance box to management. Then the management must take those particular grievances into consideration. All right, then workers must have access to potable water and hand washing facilities. So as you can see, this is a bolded, it's a major must requirement. So it's very important that workers must have access to drinking water. Potable water simply refers to water that is drinkable. Yeah, and the hand washing facilities must be of sanitary condition. It must be kept hygienic and cleaned. And like I said earlier, each time they are cleaned, there must be records to prove that they have been cleaned. Then in an instant where workers have got access to housing on farm, those particularly living quarters, they must be habitable or they must be of sanitary condition. Special attention must be paid on doors. The doors must be able to open and close. You know, they should not constitute any dangers or any easy access for anybody outside. They must be lockable in a way. Then also you would like to have a look at your windows and your roof if they are not they are of good quality as well. All right, so this brings us to the end of our presentation for today. I would like to thank you for taking your time to be with me. And if you've got any inquiries or questions, I advise you to make use of these contact details are provided here on the screen. Yeah, and I would like to bring to your attention, we have simplified things, particularly for growers in the crops, particularly for crop growers. We are selling a global G.A.P document toolkit, which consists of your risk assessment, your policies. It consists of your procedures. It also consists of your templates for your document records, or templates that you would use in order to put your records for hygiene, cleaning records, for example, your calibration records and so on. So yeah, those can be found on OSC Consultants website, which is www.ascconsultants.co.za. And you can also have a look at our blog. There is a tab on our website which says blogs. So we do post very informative articles regarding global G.A.P and other food safety management systems such as your BRCs, FSSCs, etc. And yeah, I trust that you would find that information quite informative and useful, and it will contribute in enhancing your knowledge and enhancing your food safety management system, as well as contributing to passing your external audit. So once again, thank you for your time. Until we meet on the next webinar. Yeah, thank you for your time.